De ce adevărul meu este cenzurat?
Căci este viu și viu înseamnă periculos pentru munci.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty provocative source that's been making the rounds, called Ursula, BioNTech, and the Selling of Europe. Now, just to be clear, we're not here to fact-check its claims. Instead, our goal is to really understand the story it's telling and, more importantly, how it builds its case.
Right out of the gate, the source we're looking at hits you with this really dramatic line. A signature, a name, an unseen contract. You can feel it, right? It immediately creates this atmosphere of suspense, hinting that we're about to hear about some secret deal with huge consequences for everybody in Europe. Okay, so let's get right into it. The whole story really hangs on this one central accusation, a massive betrayal coming from the very top of the European power structure.
Yeah, the narrative really doesn't pull any punches. It doesn't frame this as some dry political negotiation. No, it calls it a sale, and it points the finger directly at Ursula von der Leyen as the one holding the pen. The story casts the European people, you, as the source calls them, as the ones who ended up paying the bill without even knowing.
So, this brings us to the first big part of the source's argument. It zooms in on the European Union's vaccine deal, specifically the big contract with Pfizer and BioNTech, right in the middle of the pandemic.
The way the source builds its case here is by painting this really stark before and after picture. On the one hand, you have BioNTech in 2019, presented as a total unknown with zero products out there. Then, boom, less than a year later, it's signing this giant deal with the EU. The source uses that contrast to suggest this incredible rise was anything but an accident.
And then there's this number, 35 billion euros. The source brings this up again and again. It's like the financial anchor for the whole story, designed to make you feel the enormous scale of what was at stake.
Now here's where the source makes a really critical claim about how this all went down. It alleges the whole deal was arranged not through normal official channels, but through secret text messages, messages that it says just vanished later on. This idea of concealment is a really key piece of its narrative.
The source then argues that the real cost of this deal was spelled out in the contract itself. It alleges that the agreement forced mandatory doses on people, paid for with public money, all while giving the company complete legal immunity. And, it claims, citizens were left with no way to appeal. According to this story, this is the real price of the alleged betrayal.
This line comes from a character in the source's script, a guy named Miguel 01. He's the one who delivers all the big, punchy, assertive lines. This code is really interesting because it's trying to head off any arguments that this is just a conspiracy theory. It's framing it as a simple, hidden fact. A contract that was signed for you, but that you were never allowed to actually see.
Okay, so let's shift gears now to the second major pillar of the argument. The story pivots away from the pandemic and moves on to the war in Ukraine. It focuses on a totally different, but, just as controversial financial decision.
And just like before, the narrative kicks things off with another huge number to frame the debate: $300 billion. That's the value it puts on the Russian state reserves that were frozen by the EU. This really sets the stage for the moral problem the source is about to present.
So the story talks about the EU's plan to use the profits from these frozen assets to help rebuild Ukraine. But it's careful not to frame this as just a geopolitical move or a sanction. Instead, it presents it as something that's fundamentally questionable from the get-go. And then it hits you with this really powerful rhetorical question. How can you build peace with stolen money? See that? By using the word stolen, it completely reframes the whole issue. It's not about sanctions anymore. It's about whether you can build peace on a foundation that the source is calling straight-up theft. So this is where we get to the core idea of the whole thing. The argument is that the vaccine deal and this plan for the Russian assets, they aren't two separate issues. According to the source, they're connected by something it calls a contract of silence.
So what's the connection? What's the common thread here? Well, according to this narrative, it's not about the details of the deals themselves. It's about the process, how they were made. The source argues that both of these are just symptoms of a much deeper problem in the way European power works.
The source lays out this four-step process, which it calls its grand theory of bureaucratic treason. The argument is that it doesn't matter if you're talking about vaccines or Russian assets. The playbook is exactly the same. No public discussion, Parliament is kept in the dark, messages are hidden, and a final contract is signed in secret.
And this quote, again from that Miguel 01 character, is pretty much the script's final verdict. It wraps up the whole argument. It's saying that these actions point to a system that's operating outside of any real democratic control. It's just a transaction, a sale, with no refunds, and as the source says, no soul.
So after all of that, how does this incredibly charged story end? Well, it doesn't just wrap up with a neat little summary. Instead, it throws out a direct challenge to the person listening. It basically tries to pass the responsibility from the storyteller over to the audience.
The script's final move is basically to say, all right, my job is done. The truth, as it defines it, is out there now. The secret's been told. And so the question isn't what happened anymore. It's what are you gonna do about it?
And that's the last line. This really provocative question just left hanging there. Do you share it or bury it again? It frames doing nothing as a deliberate choice to rebury this supposed truth. It's a clever way to turn you from just a passive listener into an active participant. A really confrontational way to end a story that's all about secrets and revelation.